Welcome to the 2022 ELCA Churchwide Assembly hearing for a 2023 to 2025 budget proposal. Hearings are non-legislative sessions for voting members to ask clarifying questions on certain topics before the Assembly. I'm Jim Jennings, and I serve as the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee for the Church Council. We're very fortunate tonight to have a number of resource staff with us to help answer your questions as they are able. Before we share a general background and presentation on memorials for this assembly, a couple of housekeeping notes. When you hover near the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see three controls. Audio settings let you switch playback speakers on your device. Chat will be used to share information and links with attendees. The Zoom Tech Helper will now post a link to locate the 2023 to 2025 budget proposal. The main control you'll be using today is the question and answer button to ask your questions. Remember that only questions from voting members will be answered during the hearing. Also, the hearing presentation will be recorded and preserved for viewing later on the ELCA Churchwide Assembly video webpage. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Lori Fettick, Treasurer of the ELCA, and Pastor Louise Johnson, Executive for Administration, who will provide the presentation portion of tonight's session.
Thank you, Jim, and good evening. My name is Lori Fettick, and I serve as treasurer of the ELCA. My colleague, Reverend Louise Johnson, Executive for Administration, and I are excited to share our vision of what is in store for the ELCA Churchwide organization for the next 3 years, as it's told through the budget. First of all, I want to say thank you to all of you for the many ways that you have generously shared your gifts with the Churchwide organization. These gifts make our work possible. We take very seriously the importance of carefully stewarding these assets which have been entrusted to us. First, as you know, our budget is a guide to help us allocate the spending of the resources. However, rarely do the results go exactly as planned. And I think 2020 and 2021 are prime examples of that. We recognize that we will need to make adjustments along the way, and our Constitution provides us with the opportunity to make those necessary changes through the Church Council as the interim legislative body between assemblies. The voting members at the Churchwide Assembly will be asked to vote on 3 years of revenue projections, 2023 through 2025, and 1 year of spending, 2023, for the unrestricted or current fund budget and for the ELCA World Hunger budget. Our plans provide for a break-even budget where revenues equal expenses in each year. The budget materials are found in the pre-assembly recommendations of the Church Council, Section 5. I want to begin by showing a chart with a lot of numbers. This slide represents the various sources of revenue, beginning with the current year budget and followed by the proposed revenues by source for 2023 to 2025. Overall, the budget reflects 2% growth each year. There are a couple of key things on this slide that I want to highlight. Let's look first at the first line, mission support. For those of you who may not be familiar with that term, a portion of the offerings that your worshiping communities receive is shared with your synod. The synod retains half and retains a portion and shares the remainder with the Churchwide organization. Mission support remains the single largest source of revenue, representing approximately 60% of our total current fund revenue. Mission support is projected to decrease each year by $850,000, or approximately 2.1%. This is in line with the historical average. The next line is direct and fundraising gifts. Revenue growth averaging about 7% per year over each year in the 3-year period is expected in this area. Post-campaign, we continue to see growth as a result of the work of the fundraising team, as well as increased awareness of our work amongst members. Projections were based on discussions with the development team. Let's move down to the fourth line up from the bottom, entitled Use of Mission Development Fund. We plan to utilize $2 million per year from an endowment to support the work of innovation. While we are not actively fundraising for innovation work, the goal to engage with new, young, and diverse people in new ways has begun to generate interest from some donors, and this will represent an opportunity for future revenue streams. Finally, let's look at the last line, second to last line, called budget gap. Based on our projected spending needs, we currently have a gap of between 7 and 9% of our total income in 2024 and 2025. We recognize the need to balance the budget, and we are confident that we will be able to close this gap through either additional sources of revenue or reduced spending. Now I want to turn it over to Reverend Louise Johnson, Executive for Administration, to talk about how our goal to engage with 1 million new, young, and diverse people by the end of the decade informs the budget.
There we go. Thank you, Lori. I appreciate that. I apologize for a little technical difficulty there. As you may know, the ELCA has set a goal to share the story of Jesus and the ELCA by engaging with 1 million new people as we grow the church together. Or, as we like to say it around the Churchwide organization, we're longing to engage 1 million new, young, diverse people. This work is not about people in pews or dollars in the plate, but about our deep calling to make disciples of all nations, to activate each of us so that more people know the way of Jesus and discover community, justice, and love. That's the ELCA's new purpose statement, by the way. You'll notice that on the screen as well. And it will take all of us working together, learning new ways of being church to accomplish what God is calling us to do. Well, I apologize. I'm having a hard time getting the screen to move here. There we go. In Isaiah 43:19, a verse that may be familiar to many of you, God says, I am about to do a new thing. It's a word of hope for the Israelites in the midst of change, and a word of hope to us, I think, also in the midst of change. And for that, I'm grateful. But we often fail to reckon with what comes before that in Isaiah. Beginning at verse 16, God recalls Israel's seminal story, their defining history of God's deliverance of them from slavery in Egypt. Some would say it is the story for Israel. It reminds them of who God is, who they are, and how they are to live in the world. But here God calls it to mind and then instructs them to do something almost unthinkable. Do not remember the former things of, or consider the things of old. Behold, I am about to do a new thing. The Israelites are called to forget what came before so that their hearts and minds can perceive the new things that God is doing. What are our defining stories? What are the things that we must let go of in order to perceive the new things that God is doing or will do in our midst? The work of letting go is hard. At the start of the ELCA, faithful people with a heart for the gospel imagined a new way to be the church. Thanks be to God for them. Many, many people have come to know the love of God and Jesus through our congregations, agencies, schools, synods, and church, and through our witness, service, and love. But what we also know is that the world around us has changed dramatically and is still changing, and that our church has the hard work of discerning what should remain and what should change. We are being called to find new ways of being the church together, of perceiving the new things that God is doing among us, and letting go of what some of what has been. Like most organizations these days, we are navigating a process of change. We know that we need to do things differently, but learning what to do differently is often a process of experimentation. One of our budget goals is to migrate 30% of our time, energy, and resources toward this work of engaging new, young, and or diverse people, and to do that migration by 2025. Which is to say that 70% of our resources will be dedicated to the core work of the church as we know it. 20% will be dedicated to reimagining existing ministries that reach new audiences. And 10% of our resources will be dedicated to new ministries that reach new audiences, for a total of 30% of our work committed to the work of innovation. You will see that migration begin in the 2023 budget proposal. The other challenge we face is that we must learn our way into being a new church. If any of us knew how to engage 1 million new people, I suspect we would already be doing it. Our hearts long to pass on the faith to new generations and to respond to God's call to make disciples of all nations, and as our own purpose statement says, to activate each of us so that more people know the way of Jesus and discover community, justice, and love. Old strategic planning models call on us to put together a series of activities which draw from old mental maps. Often this process makes us feel comfortable and organized, but nearly always produces the same results, the ones that are no longer serving us well. The truth is that we do not yet know how to effectively engage new, young, and or diverse people. I don't mean that none of us does. Certainly there are places where this is happening, but as a denomination, we have a lot to learn. If we did know, we would build a strategic plan and do it on a macro level. We are, in leadership language, in an adaptive environment. The term adaptive does not refer to minor adjustments we make along the way, but instead refers to the work of learning and discovering new ways to do things that are effective in the environment in which we live. The work ahead of us to become a church that engages new, young, and diverse people requires us to learn, to experiment, and to build new ways of being church with the same new, young, and diverse people we hope to engage. That work requires more than a strategic plan. It requires a movement. It calls on each of us to be prayerful and brave in reaching out to new people and generous in sharing what we are learning. It requires us to let go of some of the old ways in which we have been church together so that we have the time, energy, and resources to commit to new ideas that reach new people. Our commitment to this work of migrating from what we have been to what we will be is reflected in the budget in several ways. Number one, our goal is to commit 10% of our resources in the coming year to engaging new people in and through our partnerships with synods and congregations and other organizations. Each home area is shifting their time and energy and budget by 10% each year over the next 3 years. One example of this is in the Christian community and leadership home area. The young adult recruiter, whose name is May Helen Jackson, is building relationships with African descent and Latino congregations and historically Black colleges and universities to invite young adults into programs like Young Adults and Global Mission. Current ministries reshaped to do new things. You'll also see in the budget where new funds have been dedicated through the Mission Development Fund to support the work of innovative projects that draw on the wisdom of those in our church to engage new, young, and diverse people. One example of this, which also supports the work of the Strategy for Authentic Diversity, is money that's going to support very promising African descent pastors and congregations. Additional funds for ministry and expert coaches and consultants will build on strengths and troubleshoot challenges. Learnings from these congregations will go to inform our work of developing new African descent congregations. Finally, you'll see additional support identified for the Innovation Home area for projects that enhance our ability to work with new, young, and diverse people. For example, they are now working with a trusted partner to learn who the most recent new members of the ELCA are and how we might learn to identify and engage more of them. There's a lot more going on that might not necessarily be reflected in our budgets, but is a commitment of our time and our work. Lori will now wrap up the presentation with a look at the 2023 spending authorization.
Thank you, Louise. I hope you're as excited about this work as we are. The next slide outlines how our home area, how our budget for 2023 will shift as we begin to focus more on engagement with new, young, and diverse. As Louise mentioned, our goal is to get to 30% new over a 3-year period. For the programmatic areas of Christian community and leadership and service and justice, the goal is to move 10% of the new work in 2023. While the offices, which tend to be more administrative in nature, will plan for a 5% shift. The innovation team will be 100% focused on new work, resulting in nearly 12% of our spending to be focused on the engagement of new, young, and diverse. Each of us, staff, congregational members, rostered leaders, synod leadership, seminaries, colleges, and universities, our separately incorporated ministries, agencies, and the rest of the ecology has a role in this work. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, we read, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Now I want to shift your attention to ELCA World Hunger, where, as you see, we are planning for expenditures to equal revenues. Your continued generous support of ELCA World Hunger allows us to provide aid for 67 countries and 43 states and territories. 2021 was a record year in direct giving, and because of this, we were able to do even more programmatic work in 2022. Budgeted revenues show modest growth over the recent record years at over 22 million, and that's excluding the increase for the special adjustment in 2022 related to some carryover projects that were delayed in 2021. Again, I want to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present our financial plans for the next triennium, and once again for your unwavering support of this church. I will turn it back to